What happens when a powerful CEO forced his loyal maid to pretend to be his wife for one night? As the night unfolds, their roles blur, and an undeniable connection sparks between them. Can they ignore the burning desire threatening to change everything? Or will one night of pretense turn into a lifetime of love? Discover the forbidden chemistry and the life-altering choice that could shatter their carefully built worlds. Enjoyed the story? Don't miss out on more exciting twists and romantic drama. Hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss a single chapter. Stay tuned for more thrilling moments and heartfelt surprises. Damian Black sat at the head of his desk, surrounded by towering stacks of paperwork and glowing digital screens that showcased his empire. As CEO of Black Enterprises, he had the world at his feet, wealth, power, and status that few could dream of. Yet as he stared at the sleek black invitation in his hand, he felt a wave of unease. His childhood friend, Richard Sinclair, was throwing an extravagant party at his private estate, an event that promised to be the highlight of the year, attended by the who's who of the city's elite. The kind of event where appearances mattered more than anything else. Damian knew the drill. He was expected to be there, surrounded by others of his caliber looking flawless. Yet there was one thing he feared more than anything else: showing up alone. Recently single after a high-profile breakup, Damian dreaded the thought of entering the party without a companion, knowing the whispers that would follow. Damian Black alone again. What's wrong with him? The thought was unbearable. As the hours ticked by, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. There was no way he could attend without someone by his side. But who? The thought of asking any of his past flings felt shallow, and the idea of showing up with someone who wasn't his choice made him cringe. Damian needed a solution, a way to avoid the judgment, the pitying glances, and the quiet gossip. His thoughts wandered to Emily Harper, a young maid who worked in his mansion. Emily was nothing like the others who worked under his roof. Quiet, poised, and almost unnervingly competent, she stood apart from the rest of the staff. Over the year, he had noticed her more than he cared to admit. Her intelligence, her ability to manage everything from the smallest detail to the most complex task, and the way she carried herself with quiet confidence. She was often in the background, doing her work without seeking attention. But there was something magnetic about her. She moved through the house with an ease that suggested she belonged anywhere, even if she didn't realize it herself. Damian had never considered her as anything more than part of his staff, but today that thought seemed to shift. In a mansion full of faces that were there for work or business, Emily was different. There was something about her that struck him as intriguing, someone he could trust, not just for the night, but as a person who was competent and poised. It made her the perfect choice. Later that afternoon, as the mansion quieted down after the day's bustle, Damian found himself standing in the staff quarters. Emily was folding laundry, her back turned as she worked with focused efficiency. He took a deep breath, a knot of uncertainty forming in his stomach. He had no idea how she would react to his request, but desperation led him to speak. "Emily," Damian started, his voice a little firmer than he intended. She looked up, her eyes meeting his. "Yes, Mr. Black?" she responded, her voice calm and composed. Damian hesitated for a moment, his thoughts swirling. "I have a favor to ask, something a little out of the ordinary." Emily raised an eyebrow, curious but not betraying any emotion. She had always seen him as the controlled, composed CEO, someone who never let his guard down. Yet today he seemed vulnerable. "I've been invited to a party, a rather important one, and I need a date," he continued. "The kind of date everyone expects me to bring to such events. Someone who can handle the attention, the questions, the scrutiny." Emily's brow furrowed slightly, unsure of where this was going. "You want me to help with the party arrangements?" Damian shifted uncomfortably, his tone changing. "No, I need you to come with me. I need you to pretend to be my wife, for the night. It's only for appearances, of course." There was a brief silence as Emily absorbed the request. She blinked, clearly taken aback by the suddenness and the audacity of it. She had never imagined being asked such a thing. "You want me to what?" Her voice was tinged with disbelief. "Pretend to be your wife. For one night?" "Yes," Damian said, his voice steady but laced with an underlying tension. "It's only for appearances, Emily. I don't want to deal with the gossip and the judgment. I need someone to stand beside me. Someone I can trust." He paused, realizing how his words sounded. "You're the only one who could pull this off." Emily stared at him, uncertainty flashing in her eyes. She had never considered herself as anything more than a maid, her life so carefully contained within the walls of the mansion. The idea of stepping outside that role, even for a night, felt surreal. But as she glanced at Damian, her instincts told her he wasn't asking out of selfishness or ego. He seemed genuinely troubled. His usual composure had faltered, revealing a rare vulnerability. After a long pause, Emily finally nodded, her voice calm but firm. "All right, I'll do it. But there's one condition." Damian, relieved but curious, nodded in agreement. "What's that?" She met his gaze. "It stays professional. I'll play the role, but that's all it is. No attachments, no emotions." Damian's breath caught in his chest for a moment before he exhaled, a sense of relief flooding him. "Agreed, just for one night. That's all I need." As they shook hands on the deal, the weight of what had just been agreed upon hung in the air. Emily's role was simple: pretend to be Damian's wife and help him save face. Damian's plan was clear: get through the night without being judged for attending alone. But neither of them could predict what would come next. The boundaries they had set, professional, detached, and emotionless, would soon be tested. Neither of them had anticipated that this evening, this simple favor, would lead to a deep and complex change in their relationship. As they parted ways to prepare for the evening, Damian realized something he hadn't before. Emily was no longer just his maid. She had become someone different, someone who for one night could make him feel like he wasn't alone in the world. And Emily too began to wonder what would happen when the night ended, and what would remain after the pretense was over. The doors of Richard Sinclair's private estate swung open as Damian and Emily stepped into a world of dazzling opulence. The ballroom shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their prisms scattering light across the room, casting delicate reflections on the marble floors. The walls were adorned with rich tapestries and towering windows that looked out onto the sprawling gardens. The air was filled with the scent of expensive perfumes, mingling with the soft music of a live orchestra. The party was everything Damian had expected, and more. An exclusive gathering, populated by the city's elite, where every guest seemed perfectly placed in the social hierarchy. Damian felt the familiar weight of expectation settle on his shoulders. He was no longer the confident CEO in his office or boardroom. Here, he was just another player in a high-stakes game of appearances. The crowd's eyes subtly turned toward him, assessing who he had brought along. He straightened his back, adjusted his cufflinks, and then glanced down at Emily. She was no longer just his maid. In a stunning emerald gown, she looked every bit the part of the woman on his arm. The dress clung to her figure in a way that was both elegant and effortless. Her dark hair was swept into a sophisticated updo, and the makeup she wore highlighted her sharp features, giving her a glow that made her nearly unrecognizable from the simple maid he had known. As the two of them entered, Damian couldn't help but notice how Emily's transformation seemed to capture the attention of everyone around them. She moved with a quiet grace, a composed confidence that drew admiring glances from the guests. It was as if she had shed her old self completely, becoming someone far more captivating. She no longer seemed out of place. Instead, she belonged here among the high society. For Damian, the reality of their situation suddenly became stark. The woman who had once been just a quiet, humble maid was now standing beside him as his wife, blending into a world he had never imagined her being a part of. He had never seen her like this, so poised, so confident, and as much as he tried to focus on the conversations around him, his gaze was frequently drawn back to her. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was a woman who commanded attention, who could captivate a room without saying a word. Emily's beauty and presence soon became impossible to ignore. The guests, accustomed to the polished perfection of the rich and powerful, found themselves drawn to her effortlessly. She moved with such poise that it seemed as if she belonged in the very fabric of this world, not the one she had left behind at the mansion. Conversations flowed easily around her as she spoke with people, her intelligence and charm shining through in every exchange. Damian watched, his breath catching as he realized that Emily had not just transformed in appearance but in presence as well. He was no longer the only one who noticed her. Everyone in the room seemed enchanted by her, drawn to the quiet elegance she exuded. He had expected a simple evening of pretending, but the more he saw Emily in this new light, the more his feelings for her shifted. It was as if the world had suddenly opened up in front of him, and he couldn't look away. She wasn't just a woman playing a part. She was someone who demanded to be seen and admired. What started as an arrangement of convenience had become something far more complicated. As the night wore on, Damian found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions. Admiration was quickly replaced by a growing sense of desire, mixed with the guilt that began to gnaw at him. He had asked her to play a role, to pretend to be something she wasn't, and yet he was beginning to feel drawn to her in ways that went beyond the confines of the evening. The more he watched Emily, the more his thoughts became consumed by her. The subtle grace in the way she moved, the warmth in her laugh, the way she spoke with such ease, everything about her captivated him. He had always prided himself on his ability to keep control, to maintain a distance from his emotions, but Emily had completely unsettled him. He felt an undeniable pull, one that he couldn't shake, and with it came the overwhelming realization that this wasn't just a fleeting attraction. Something deeper was happening, something he wasn't prepared for. Meanwhile, Emily too found herself caught in a similar storm of emotions. She had never expected this. When she agreed to play the role of Damian's wife, she had expected it to be nothing more than a simple favor, a way to help him save face at a party. But as she found herself surrounded by the high-profile guests, conversing with ease and receiving praise for her beauty and intelligence, she began to feel a growing connection to Damian that she hadn't anticipated. At first, it was subtle, just a fleeting glance or a shared smile. But as the night progressed, she felt the pull of something more. It wasn't just admiration, there was something deeper beneath the surface, something that tied her to him in a way that was undeniable. She was no longer just playing a role for him. She was beginning to feel like a real part of his world. As the evening progressed, the tension between them became palpable. Their act of pretense, which had started as something simple and controlled, was beginning to slip out of their hands. Damian's jealousy began to creep in, an emotion he hadn't expected. He watched as Emily interacted with other guests, particularly a charming businessman who lingered just a bit too long in their conversation, a flirtation in his smile. Damian felt a flicker of irritation burn in his chest, jealousy rising up within him. The idea of another man noticing Emily, the way he seemed so drawn to her, left him feeling unsettled, possessive. He had never been one to feel jealous over a simple interaction, but this time it was different. Emily wasn't just his date for the night, she was his. Emily, on the other hand, felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest as well. She noticed the subtle tension in Damian's eyes whenever he watched her with others. The jealousy was unmistakable, and though she knew it was irrational, a part of her couldn't help but feel pleased by it. It was a strange sensation, one that left her wondering if she, too, was beginning to see him in a new light. As the evening wore on, the boundaries they had set, professional and detached, were increasingly hard to maintain. Both Damian and Emily began to question the nature of their connection, the growing feelings between them that neither could fully understand or control. The night was far from over, and the emotional stakes were rising. Neither of them knew what would come next, but they both understood one thing. The pretense was beginning to slip and the real emotions were beginning to surface. As the evening continued, the weight of the emotions that had been building throughout the night became impossible to ignore. Damian found himself increasingly unable to tear his gaze away from Emily. Every laugh, every glance, every word she spoke only seemed to intensify his feelings for her. What started as a simple favor, a means to maintain appearances, had now evolved into something much deeper, something far more complicated. Emily too felt it. The connection that had started as a calculated pretense was now undeniable. Every moment they shared, every private conversation, every shared smile pulled her closer to him. She had told herself this was just a role to play, nothing more. But as she saw Damian in the light of his vulnerability, his charm and his undeniable warmth, she realized that the boundaries she had set for herself had become increasingly difficult to maintain. She had never expected to fall for him. Not like this. Not when the emotional stakes were so high and the consequences so severe. The night had stretched on, but by now most of the guests had begun to drift into the lounge or the terrace. Damian excused himself, feeling the weight of the growing tension inside him. His thoughts had become a chaotic swirl, and he couldn't ignore the desire to finally confront what he had been trying so hard to suppress. He found Emily on the balcony, standing alone by the railing, gazing out at the city below. The evening breeze ruffled her hair, and for a moment she seemed distant, lost in thought. Damian hesitated, then took a step closer. "Emily," he began, his voice softer than usual. She turned to face him, her eyes meeting his with a look of quiet curiosity. "I need to tell you something," he said, his chest tightening. "I can't keep pretending anymore." Emily's heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she felt a surge of apprehension. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice gentle but laced with the unspoken question of what might come next. He stepped closer, the distance between them now reduced to nothing more than a few feet. He could feel his pulse racing as he searched her eyes for any sign of understanding. What started as a favor, as a simple role for the night, it's become something else. Something I can't ignore. I'm falling for you, Emily, I can't deny it. I don't see you just as my maid anymore. I see you as someone who's become a part of my life, and that's terrifying." The words hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she processed what he had just confessed. She had suspected it, felt it in the way he looked at her, in the way he always made sure she was comfortable, even in a room full of people who barely noticed her presence. But hearing him say it aloud was something entirely different. Damian's gaze softened. "I don't know what to do with this, but I know I can't pretend anymore. I've been fighting it all night, but the more I'm around you, the more I realize that I don't want this night to end like a pretense. I want something real, Emily. I want you." Emily stood still, her mind racing. What Damian was saying was both thrilling and terrifying. She had told herself this was just a role. It was just for the night. She had no right to let her feelings get involved. Yet standing there, listening to Damian's confession, she felt something inside her shift. The professional boundaries she had always maintained were beginning to crack under the weight of the truth between them. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. She had worked for him for so long, knowing that their worlds could never truly collide. He was the CEO of a powerful empire, while she had been relegated to the background, a servant in his mansion. She knew that a relationship between them, something real, was not just complicated but dangerous. The power imbalance, the societal expectations, the professional lines they had carefully constructed, it all made it seem impossible. And yet, the pull she felt toward him was undeniable. It wasn't just his wealth or his status that drew her in. It was the man he was, vulnerable, open, and willing to risk everything for something more. Something deeper. She had never imagined this would be the outcome when she agreed to play his wife for one night. Damian watched her, his chest tightening as she remained silent for a long moment. He was afraid that his confession might push her away, that the truth he had laid bare might cause her to recoil. But Emily finally spoke, her voice soft yet resolute. "Damian," she whispered, stepping closer to him, "I never expected this. I never expected you to feel this way. But I do too. I feel it too." Her words were a balm to his anxious heart, and for a moment all the weight of the evening seemed to lift. They stood there facing each other, the silent understanding between them louder than any words could be. "I'm scared," Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of what could happen between us, of what it could cost us. You're a CEO and I'm just me, a maid. We come from different worlds." Damian reached out, his hand gently cupping her face. "It doesn't matter. You're not just a maid to me, Emily. You're more than that. You've always been more than that. I'm willing to risk everything for this. The power dynamics that had once been so clear between them were now shifting. For the first time, Emily felt like she had a choice, like the power in their relationship wasn't just in Damian's hands anymore. She could see the vulnerability in his eyes, and in that moment, she realized that she too could control the direction of their future. She could choose to walk away, to protect herself from the potential heartache, or she could take a step forward into the unknown with him. The emotional stakes had never been higher, and as they stood there facing each other, neither could deny the depth of the feelings that had formed between them. The boundaries they had set at the start were no longer enough to hold back the tide of emotions that had surged between them. The moment had come. It was time for a decision. As the party came to an end, the last of the guests trickled out of Richard Sinclair's estate, their laughter and chatter fading into the night. Damian and Emily made their way back to the mansion, the weight of the evening's events settling in. The energy that had buzzed around them all night, sophisticated, charming, calculated, had now dissolved, leaving something raw and unspoken in its place. The drive back to the mansion was quieter than usual. Damian sat beside Emily, his mind swirling with everything that had happened. The masquerade, the pretense, the role they had both played, it all felt so distant now. The moments they had shared, the real emotions they had both revealed to each other, had shattered the illusion of their earlier arrangement. They were no longer pretending. Everything between them had changed irreversibly. Damian glanced at Emily, sitting quietly beside him. She was no longer just the maid. She had become someone far more significant, someone who had captured his heart in a way he hadn't expected. And as they arrived at the mansion, he knew that he couldn't go back to the way things were. Their connection was undeniable, and there was no escaping the truth that he had fallen for her. When they stepped into the quiet foyer of the mansion, the soft sound of their footsteps echoed in the empty halls. The house, once filled with the bustle of staff and party noise, now felt still. They stood there for a moment, neither one moving. Emily, sensing the change between them, turned to him. Her expression was calm, but her eyes held a flicker of uncertainty. "Damian," she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "I can't keep pretending anymore." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I've been holding on to this idea that our worlds are too different, that it's not possible, that it was just a role to play. But tonight, it's changed. I feel something for you, something real, and I'm not going to ignore it anymore." Her words hit him like a wave, and for the first time that night Damian allowed himself to fully process the depth of what she was saying. She wasn't just playing a part anymore. She was choosing him, choosing a future with him despite the barriers, despite the complications. "Emily," Damian's voice broke for a moment, his heart swelling with gratitude and relief. "I never wanted to pretend. I've been scared of this, scared of how much I feel for you, but I can't run from it anymore. I don't want to." In the stillness of the foyer, Damian knew this was the moment he had been dreading, the moment that had seemed impossible just hours before. He took a deep breath, closing the distance between them. "Emily," he said, his voice low and full of emotion, "I can't imagine my life without you. You've shown me a side of myself I didn't even know existed. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to let you go." He took her hand, holding it with a certainty that was new to him. Slowly he dropped to one knee before her, his heart racing. Emily gasped, her hands instinctively flying to her mouth in surprise. The world seemed to stop as Damian looked up at her, his eyes filled with sincerity. "I know I've made mistakes and I know our worlds are different. But what I feel for you is real, Emily. I can't deny it anymore. Will you marry me? Will you be with me? Not as a maid and a CEO, but as equals, as partners. I want to spend the rest of my life with you." The room was silent, save for the soft sound of their breathing. Emily stood frozen, overwhelmed by the moment, by the depth of Damian's words. She had never expected this, never imagined that her simple role in his life could lead to something as profound as this. Her heart raced, her thoughts spinning as she processed everything: the proposal, the vulnerability in his voice, the sincerity in his eyes. For so long, she had been afraid of this moment, afraid of what it would mean, afraid of the consequences. But in that instant, standing before Damian, she realized that she didn't need to be afraid anymore. She was ready to take the leap. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Damian, I'll marry you." The weight of the words hung in the air, and in that moment everything changed. No longer was she just his maid, and he was no longer just her employer. They were partners, equals. Together they would face whatever came next. Together. Damian stood up, pulling her into his arms as they both laughed, the tension that had held them apart finally breaking. In each other's embrace they found a sense of home, a sense of belonging. As they stood there in the quiet, empty mansion, a new chapter began for them. A chapter built on trust, love, and the willingness to take a risk for something real. The future, uncertain and full of challenges, didn't seem so daunting now, because they had each other. And in that moment, both Damian and Emily knew that despite everything that had kept them apart, they had found something lasting, something worth fighting for. Together, they were no longer bound by roles or expectations. They were free to love each other, and that was all that mattered.